The Ruger P series, like the P85, the P89, that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the podcast. Hopefully we keep God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world firsthand experience. You guys probably know my background: military, law enforcement, competition shooting, private security contracting. That said, today, most of my experience and knowledge of these guns is by proxy. I've never owned a Ruger P series, probably why in the 6 or so years I've been doing this podcast, I haven't really covered them in depth, because I don't have firsthand knowledge of them, as in I've never owned one, never shot one in competition, never carried one on duty. But I have been around them. I've been a professional firearms instructor for everything from the F.B.I. to one of the largest firearm schools in the country. I've been around them. I've known people that have had them. So again, by proxy, I know their reputation. I know kind of how they function and how they're built. Kind of like a tank. But that's what we're going to talk about today, the Ruger P series. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due. I did some research before this episode on the technical aspects of it. So if I give you any technical thing like the barrel is 4.5 inches longer, this model came out in 1989. That's going to come from guns.com. I found a pretty good guns.com article. You just obviously use a search engine and look it up. It was a pretty good comprehensive article on the Ruger P series, and it covered some things that I did not know. All right, let's get into it. The Ruger P series. These were some of the early generation of modern semi-autos, which is what I'm going to define it as, right? Like a Mauser broom handle is not a modern semi-auto. A Tokarov is not a modern semi-auto. A 1911 are very good guns, but they're literally antiques, the originals, right? They're made in 1911. But of the newer generations that started in the 80s and 90s, when we would think of modern double-stack 9mm, other than, the Browning High Power, the CZ75. This was like the beginning of the modern era of police and military use of modern double-stack 9mm semi-autos. And we saw, a rise of a lot of these at the same time. We saw the Smith & Wesson, numbered series like the 59, 459, 5906s, whatever, the rise of those, the big competition between the Beretta 92, which replaced after a long stint the 1911. We saw the close runner-up to that competition, the SIG 226. And we actually saw, entering that competition, one of these Ruger P series. That was in that handgun competition for the U.S. military contract. So again, this was the start of the modern military semi-auto high-capacity 9mm in law enforcement circles. This was kind of the beginning of that for us. You may have found some cop somewhere that carried a Browning High Power or something before this, but it was rare. You got to remember, and I became a cop in the mid-aughts, and there were still cops carrying wheel guns, like in big departments, as their primary carry gun. So this, even in the 2000s, was still a transition. But in the 90s, we really saw a big swing to the modern high-capacity semi-autos. So this was part of that. And part of that is the Ruger, kind of what they're known for. Ruger makes a lot of things. They make a lot of guns. But one of the things, if I could think of one thing that I think of them as being known for, it's a working man's gun on a working man's budget. They take a lot of designs, they make them more affordable, they make them pretty rugged and robust, again, like a blue-collar working man's gun for a working man's salary. We look at like the Mini 14, the Ruger M77, and more modern, times the Ruger American rifles, the Black Hawk revolvers, just as some examples. Well, we see this also in the Ruger P series. They may not have been the most beautiful and elegant of guns like a Beretta 92. They may not have had the fine Italian craftsmanship or German craftsmanship, but they were a rugged, fairly affordable working man's high-capacity semi-auto. And that's, I think, really where they found their niche. They may have had some contracts, but not a lot. They're really an affordable American working man's high-capacity semi-auto. And that's kind of where they came in and where they shined. That's kind of where Ruger does well, I think, in general. They do make some good higher-end stuff and some beautiful stuff like a Ruger number 1. But I think in general they're known for that genre. And again, some of this is going to come from the guns.com article because I want to give credit where it's due. Ruger's first production centerfire semi-auto pistol, the P85, had a lot going on. Using an aluminum alloy frame, stainless barrel, and cast steel slide, the 15+ one-shot semi-auto was designed as a combat handgun in an era that had little competition. Double action, single action. Okay, and this was, I'm going to interject here. This is me. Double action, single action was kind of very prevalent in the early high-capacity semi-auto days. A lot of people that were getting these were used to revolvers. They were used to that long, heavy double-action trigger. And I don't think they trusted themselves yet with lighter, better triggers in general. Even the military, usually when you carried a 1911, you carried it chamber empty. So if they were going to carry it with a round in the chamber, the thinking of the time was we want that long, heavy, disgusting double-action trigger. And you see this on a lot of guns. The Beretta 92, the SIG 226, the traditional ones are double-single. These, the Smith & Wessons, a lot of them of this era, double-single actions. So we see that here in the Ruger. It also touched on, they mentioned the aluminum frame. That's one of the things that are like iconic for this pistol. Now, the SIGs and the Berettas, they had aluminum frames too, but this was like aluminum. Like it looked like it was just kind of dumped in a mold. It's very beefy looking. It's a very beefy, robust, and kind of crude aluminum frame. Again, it lacks the elegance of the SIG or the Beretta, but it's rugged. It's like a rugged, beefy aluminum frame. So this aluminum, it's still an era where people are skeptical of plastic guns. You know, the Glocks were just coming out. I remember an older cop telling me, don't leave it on my dash, it'll melt. The tactical Tupperware phase would come later. This was still an era where men wanted metal-on-metal guns. And this was a metal-on-metal gun. Granted, it was aluminum, not steel, but it was a metal-on-metal gun with traditional grip panels that you would put on there. So this was again, that early transition into modern high capacity before the plastic, fantastic polymer striker fire craze would come in hard. Now, this goes on to say that the Ruger P85, the early one, you'll kind of notice these because they're black on black. But the ones that I have seen more around are the Ruger P89. It came in after 1992, the P89. And these are kind of the ones that I see most commonly. They are very rugged. One of the things Ruger's also known for is making stainless steel guns. This is a stainless steel on aluminum, so pretty rugged and robust. It's still got the plastic grips, but, rugged double single action, iron sights, stainless steel frame, aluminum. And it's kind of got a cool two-toned aluminum because they didn't do like the polished aluminum. They just did like a basic matte, rugged, no frills aluminum kind of cast receiver. I think it's a cast receiver. Ruger's kind of known for cast receivers. And it kind of has that distinct look about it. It really, once you see one, it doesn't really look like anything else. So again, the P89s are kind of what I'm more familiar with. In 1995, the aluminum frame was swapped out for a polymer one. Again, getting back to there was starting to be a craze for the polymer plastic fantastics, the tactical Tupperware. Well, it says here this came in with the Ruger P95. And, these are, I think, less common and I think less, I don't want to say rugged because polymer is just as rugged, but they don't have that tank appearance like the Ruger P89 and P85. So we got that. We got the 85. Another one you may see is the P90. This one is the 45. And this is kind of cool because now there's a lot of more modern, 45s. But back, in the early 90s still, if you were looking at a 45, you were probably looking at a 1911. And I love 1911s. But this was a different design. It was not such a crowded market. You may see these, the Ruger P90 in 45. Now, it's not a double stack, I believe, at least on the guns.com article. It's a single stack, I believe, 8+1. So, but it's still if you wanted that double single action, and again, a lot of cops of the era and of the time and agency said they wanted a double single action. So this gave law enforcement the ability to use a 45 in something other than a 1911 if 1911s were not approved. So that's kind of unique. And then sadly, they made one in 40 Smith & Wesson. If you have one, maybe just mothball it or, sell it to a museum. But 40 Smith & Wesson, just a sad caliber and a travesty on the American population. But they did come out with one in 40 Smith & Wesson, the P91, I think. I've never actually seen a P91. But, they made one in 40 also. And they also made a later one, the P340 something. It was a more, their idea to modernize it and slim it down. I don't think it lasted very long. But, but the big ones, the P85, the P89, the P90, and 45, these are kind of iconic early 80s, 90s handguns. And again, you might not see them a lot in military service. You might not see them a lot in law enforcement circles. I'm sure some got adopted somewhere at some point. But where you're going to see them is on the civilian market, right? That was a fairly common, again, that's why I've been tangentially exposed to these because other people I know have had them. It was a real common 80s, 90s era handgun, affordable, rugged, no frills, but a workhorse. So I guess just in wrapping the P series up here, it's not going to be a long episode, but I'm not one to just ramble on to make up content. They're cool guns. They are rugged guns. Would I want one as my primary carry in 2026? No, I would not. And this might shock some people, I don't even know if I would take one over a Glock, right? I don't know that I would. I'd have to shoot one quite a bit next to a Glock and see. But usually I would be like, hammer-fired gun, for sure I'll take it over a Glock. Glocks are, garbage guns. But in this case, I don't know that I would. I'd have to shoot them both, really, because my life or other people's lives depend on it, right? I'm a private security contractor by trade. A gunfighter, journeyman gunfighter by trade, right? So whatever tool did the job better. I'm not a big fan of I love the Beretta and the SIG 226, but I like them in the single action only variants. I'm not a big fan of double single. I'd have to really run them and see. Unlike the USP that was similar in the era that you could carry cocked and locked, I don't think that you can carry the P series cocked and locked. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'd have to run it and see. So would I choose one in 2026 as my primary carry? Probably not. Are they a bad gun? No. If you like double single and you want to marry that system, they're fine. For like a secondary, like if you're generally carrying a long gun and you're like a prepper and you want a rugged workhorse, about apocalypse proof as a handgun can get as a secondary carry, or you want one for a cache or something like that, they're good for that. If you just want a cool piece of American history and, firearms in the 80s and 90s. And also on that history, a lot of you younger guys may not remember, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and there was an assault weapons ban. So a lot of these you might find with the 10-round magazines. Now, they've since made aftermarket ones for them, but you may see a lot of these kicking around that, like where the magazines say law enforcement use only. Because back then, as much as we talk about people trying to ban guns and stuff, gun rights are way better in 2026 than they were in 1996, as somebody that grew up in the assault weapons ban. The gun laws, it was like a nationwide, you're going to be California now. It was horrible. So a lot of those older ones you might see stamped like for law enforcement use only. That's not a legal binding thing, like nobody cares. That was just the thing they put on there. Ruger was actually, sadly, a big pusher of the limited capacity magazines and stuff back in the day, if you remember that. A sad black eye, I think, in the history of Ruger. But I'm not going to brush over it. They did that. But it is an iconic piece of, American gun culture of the late 80s, early 90s. And that was a pivotal point in American gun culture. They're cool guns. They're built like tanks. They're kind of homely looking. They kind of have their own look about them. You may like them, you may hate them, but they are part of American gun culture. I thought it was worth touching on. With that, guys, I think that's gonna about wrap it up here. Talking about the 90s and getting into the early 2000s, your tactical tip of the day. Friends don't let friends carry drop leg holsters. Those were, and I carried one for a time and during the war. There's a reason those things became popular, because back when body armor started to become a thing again, for a while, like in Vietnam and stuff, people might have had flak jackets, but they didn't have proper body armor. The first early generations of body armor, like we wore in the GWAT, they were retardedly big. They were like, you were like a Ninja Turtle. Like when you sat down, your armor came up to your face. They were ridiculous, and they stuck out far. And because of that, you couldn't really carry a gun on your hip like a man. You had to carry it drop down on your thigh. Otherwise, you couldn't reach it because the body armor was so big and bulky. With the advent of better plate carriers and better armor and more streamlined stuff, that's not a thing anymore. So you don't generally see them anymore. If you are somebody is struggling with the addiction of drop leg holsters, just stop. They're not cool. They were never cool. They were a thing that people did because they had to, because the body armor was so big and bulky. They were always a workaround, and if you don't need them, don't have one. That's your tactical tip of the day. Relegate those to the museum as well. Your tactical verse of the day. I don't think a lot of women listen to this podcast, but I'm not going to shy away from this verse. It is from the book of Judges, the story of Samson. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. My interjection, nagging women. Men, beware of this. Beware of nagging women. They'll just wear you down. Beware of that. I love women. I love my wife. My wife's not one of these women, but beware of those kind of women. They exist. They existed in the time of Samson, and he got his eyes put out and killed and blinded and forced into slavery, and then eventually, you probably know that story. He kills a bunch of Philistines and takes himself out as well. But a man that killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, right? A man that ripped a lion apart with his bare hands was ground down by the nagging of a woman. So beware of nagging women. That's your tactical verse of the day. I appreciate you guys, and have a blessed day.